Alrighty, hello y'all. Welcome back to the Three-Handed Bandits channel. Once again, it is me, Nathan, back here today for a solo video where today we're going to be revealing the second to worst team for the NFL heading into this next season. We're going to be briefly breaking down the Indianapolis Colts, their off-season, how their team is shaping up. Their offense and defense, kind of look at their schedule, kind of talk about some of the stories and narratives that may be surrounding this team, and hopefully can convince you why I think this is going to be another very rough season for the Indianapolis Colts. This series is heavily inspired by that franchise guy. However, I have my own takes, own opinions, and here is one of those today. So I have the Colts as the second to worst team. Obviously, heading into last year, picking up Matt Ryan, it was a team with a lot of expectations. I was much lower on them. Obviously, everything went horribly wrong. Did I think it was going to be as bad as it ended up being? No, not at all. I don't think anybody saw it being that bad, but obviously had a very chaotic year, fired coaches, hired a never before head coach, and just a whole bunch of messiness last year that led to a very poor season. And so they're hopefully for them fixing it this season. However, I don't think they have done enough to really rebuild heading into the future. Well, I don't think they've done enough for this upcoming season. I think they've made some good steps that will help them along the future. However, there is still some issues that this team has, and we'll kind of break down that. But first, let's kind of talk about kind of their offseason, kind of what happened. So obviously, they're going to bring in Shane Steichen from Philadelphia as their head coach. Frank Reich came from Philadelphia. Sirianni left the Colts, went to Philadelphia, and now they're bringing a guy back from Philadelphia. So these two schemes have been these two teams have been fairly intertwined offensively on what they're doing on that side of the ball. So, Steichen was calling plays last year in Philly. He's going to be calling plays here in Indianapolis. So we should be able to see what the offense is going to look like for the most part. They also bring Jim Bob Cooter over from the Jaguars. Based off name alone, he is the best coach in the league. In practice, though, it's Shane Steichen's offense. Jim Bob Cooter will kind of add his own flair and kind of help run things, but it is Shane Steichen's offense. Obviously, with that new head coach and offensive coordinator, means they're losing their offensive staff from last year, whether it's Jeff Saturday or Frank Reich, and just kind of all the messiness that was that situation. Then with their first overall pick, the fourth overall pick in the draft, they obviously take Anthony Richardson, the absolute monster out of Florida. They also bring Gardner Minshew over from Philadelphia. And obviously, they lose Matt Ryan, who did not have a very good season here in Philadelphia, or in Indianapolis. In the third round, they also went with Josh Downs, as well as bringing Isaiah McKenzie, replacing Paris Campbell, who was their main slot option. On the defensive end, they bring in Samson Ebukam. I cannot speak. I bring in Samson Ebukam from San Francisco. Fourth round, take a flyer on Adebawore, who is an absolute athletic freak. I also bring in Taven Bryan from Cleveland. And they spend 3 draft picks on Juju Brents, Darius Rush, and Jalen Jones to replace a lot of what they lost on the back end in free agency and such. Obviously, some other losses I didn't mention. They lost Matt Pryor, which, frankly, based on how he played last year, it's more of an addition by subtraction there. Don't have Yannick Ngakoue anymore, which, same thing. He was not great for them. Bobby Okereke, lose him as linebacker, but they have a couple guys there that are pretty solid, so that not be the biggest loss. However, they lost Stephon Gilmore, who's still one of the better corners in the league. Isaiah Rodgers, who was probably slated to be their best corner heading into the season, is obviously indefinitely suspended for their gambling. And then they also lose Ronnie McLeod, who, outside of Stephon Gilmore, was probably their best secondary player. So, looking at a team with the 4th overall pick, I'm not sure if these additions are going to help increase the win total of this team. I think good process. Think it's going to help set them up for the future. But to me, this is not the additions for a day one impact to reset the organization like maybe some people are expecting to happen. Before we head into that, let's kind of talk about the coaching briefly. Obviously, Shane Steichen's been running the same spread system that we've seen in Philadelphia. Obviously, he was at the Browns and the Chargers at some point, but he's been with Eagles and Nick Sirianni, who was under Frank Reich. So imagine it'll be a fairly similar offense to what we've seen from this team in years past. However, it'll probably just have his own flair. Jim Bob Cooter, same thing. He was with Sirianni in the Eagles in 2021, and last year's on the Jaguars with Doug Peterson, who obviously is where Frank Reich and Shane Steichen and all these guys come from. Ultimately comes down from Andy Reid. So imagine a fairly similar offense to what we've seen in years past from these two teams, the Eagles and the Colts. And the defensive coordinator, they actually keep Gus Bradley, who's been a defensive coordinator or head coach for the past, 14, 13 seasons now. Well-respected guy across the league. I'm a bit lower on him. I feel like his defenses, especially recently, have been a bit underwhelming. But obviously, he relies heavily on his Seattle 3 scheme that was so dominant with the Legion of Boom and those early Seahawks teams. However, he does not have the Legion of Boom. He has a poor cast. Recently he's just I feel like his defenses have been underwhelming, so I'm expecting this Colts defense to overperform. No, I'm not. I'm really not. For a guy that has a lot of respect, I feel like his defenses haven't overperformed with worse talent like we've seen from other coaches. Most recently with Matt Eberflus on the same roster, who really got the best out of a not great group. I don't think Gus Bradley has really had great defenses despite having some talent. So am I expecting this defense to be some elite, well-coached defense? Not in the slightest. But now we talked about that. Obviously, a lot of the optimism from this team is going to come from the offensive side of the ball, and it's not hard to see why when you draft Anthony Richardson with the 4th overall pick. I mean, what an absolute freak this guy is. I mean, 6'4", 4'4", top 5 strongest arm in the league, just an explosive, insane athlete at a huge size. Absolute video game character. And obviously, not a perfect prospect. He's definitely in line with some of these Justin Fields, these boomer bust prospects that we've had of late, but he's kind of the best one out of these, I feel like. Obviously played in the SEC, had some really good moments, had some not great moments. Is obviously going to be very raw. Currently, Our Lads has him starting. I don't know if that's a good idea. Obviously, he's a raw prospect coming out, so I don't know if throwing him into the fire right away is the best idea. Granted, however, if he's shown this coaching staff that he can handle it and is capable of performing to that, potential that he has, then might as well give him a shot. You have nothing to lose. But I just feel like, obviously, they bring Gardner Minshew over from Philadelphia. Shane Steichen brings him over. To me, it just makes a lot of sense to give Gardner the start, at least at the beginning of the season, kind of, give Anthony Richardson some time to develop so that way when he's ready, full sail ahead. Because you don't want to come in, ruin his confidence, let him develop bad habits like we've seen from some guys like Sam Darnold, for example. But, best case scenario, Gardner Minshew is giving you the 30th best quarterback play and just doesn't have the athletic upside of most quarterbacks, let alone the athletic upside of probably the greatest athletic upside of any quarterback ever. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that about Anthony Richardson. My big concern with Anthony Richardson coming out, obviously, a lot of people talk about his poor completion percentage in college. But the thing that really spooks me the most is his average time to throw was well over 3 seconds. And, the NFL, you can't do that hero ball, that holding onto the ball and trying to score trying to hit the home run every single play. That is what has hurt Zach Wilson, hurt Justin Fields, hurt Carson Wentz of late, as these guys hold on the ball so much trying to make this big play when sometimes it just isn't there. They don't play within the structure of the offense. And so that's the big thing I'm worried about is I'd rather start Gardner Minshew, give Anthony Richardson the time to learn how to play in the NFL more than just being an insane athlete. Because obviously, athleticism steps up a bit when you're into the NFL, but Anthony Richardson's still going to be a top 1% of all athletes in the NFL, so I'm less worried about that, but it's kind of just how fast can the mental side come along for him. And so to me, it just makes a lot of sense if you bring Gardner over to give him the start and kind of let him play out until Anthony Richardson's ready. But, yet again, Anthony Richardson is an absolute freak, so if you think he's ready, no point not playing him. Then obviously they have Sam Ehlinger, just not good. He's not good. We don't have to worry about him. And so I'm maybe worried about the pass game. We'll start with his running game, because obviously if Anthony Richardson is your starter, we saw what the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts, where they got him going very well running the ball. However, Shane Steichen has the ability to do, Jalen Hurts is a good runner of the ball, but he's not going to be anything close to Anthony Richardson. So Anthony Richardson has the potential, to be this Justin Fields, Lamar Jackson-esque figure running the ball as a quarterback in the designed run game. So that's really scary, especially when you pair him with Jonathan Taylor, who, did have a very rough year last year. I'm a little bit lower on Jonathan Taylor, but obviously great athlete who had a very good season the year previous. And so, a read option where you either have to stop Anthony Richardson or Jonathan Taylor is a scary sight to behold. So even if Anthony Richardson isn't the best passer of the quarterback day one, the threat of this running game is going to be ridiculous because Jonathan Taylor is still one of the top 5 to 10-ish running backs, if not in the top 3 conversation. I'd say maybe best case he's number 4. I was still putting him behind McCaffrey, Henry, and Chubb, but he's still a top 5 to 10 running back, no doubt. So pair that with the threat of Anthony Richardson's legs, that is a scary potential for this running game. Obviously, if you're starting Gardner Minshew day one, won't be as much as a threat. And obviously, if Jonathan Taylor is poor, dealing with injuries again, you have Zach Moss in there, who is a okay running back. I'm not a huge Zach Moss guy. He's just slow, small, not explosive. I don't see it. But they seem to want to hand him the ball, so fair enough to him. They also got Evan Hull and Jake Funk, who really cares. Neither of them have really done much. Deion Jackson will probably end up being a crucial third down back for them. He's listed towards the bottom of their depth chart, but last year when he came in, especially in the passing game, had a really good year. Was really productive. Obviously, had that 10 catch game against the Jaguars. Helped me get my first fantasy football win of last season from 0-5 to the playoffs. Wouldn't have been possible without Deion Jackson in that game. So, obviously, it's Jonathan Taylor's backfield, and they'll sprinkle in Zach Moss and perhaps Deion Jackson as a third down running back to catch the ball out of the backfield. But you should have a very good running game. Obviously, we'll talk about how the offensive line is going to impact that in just a bit. Before we do, let's talk about some of this more of the passing side of the offense, where I think this team is really going to struggle. Obviously, they have Gardner Minshew, who smart quarterback, especially against zone coverage. He can really pick those apart, but just doesn't have the physical talents to really go against man coverage. You're obviously not worried about him scrambling, and he doesn't have the arm talent to really just take guys out of the play and really just put it wherever he wants. Especially with what I think is a very poor set of weapons. I'm just not super excited about the outlook of this passing offense. Part of my pessimism for this team is Shane Steichen. While I do think he'll be a good coach, same thing I was saying with Eric Bieniemy is he's going from probably the best offensive situation to potentially what could be one of the worst. He's going from A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith to Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce. He's going from Jalen Hurts to Gardner Minshew or Anthony Richardson. He's going from the best offensive line to an offensive line that was very poor last year. And so that just makes me a little bit worried about, how this offense is going to turn out. So as I was saying, wide receiver, Shane Steichen is going from A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, perhaps the best duo in the league, if not one of the best. He's going from, Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, who are just not amazing wide receivers. Michael Pittman has been in the league for a couple of years now, has been a fairly productive guy, but he's just he's a number 2 guy over for me. He's maybe the 30th to 40th best wide receiver in the league. There's a handful of guys I'd want over him. He's not a bad wide receiver. He's just a solid wide receiver. But to have him as your number 1, to me, just does not give you the upside of a true, dominant top half offense. And so I think that's really going to struggle. Obviously you can do a lot. He's just kind of solid, not really elite, not really, no one's scared of Michael Pittman. And obviously they have Alec Pierce, who had a bit of an up and down season last year. Has the potential to be a good wide receiver and a true deep threat. Has really elite speed. I think he ran like a 4.3 last year, but wasn't great. Had a lot of hiccups. Had a lot of inconsistencies. Maybe give him another year, he can really develop and catch up to NFL speed. But those two as your main outside guys, to me, just doesn't show. It's not going to give you an elite passing game, not going to give you a great passing game. Best case, it's giving you a good passing game, which I just don't see that happening. And then you throw in Isaiah McKenzie in the slot, who Brian Daboll was really using him well on his last year in Buffalo. And then when Daboll left, he kind of took a hit last season. He is getting a little bit older, but still an insane athlete and will be pretty productive coming out of the slot. He'll be a good wide receiver. At the start of the year, you'll probably see a lot of Isaiah McKenzie, and you're hoping probably by the end of the year that Josh Downs will really kind of take over in the slot for you. He has the potential to be a really good slot weapon for this team coming out of North Carolina, obviously. Not some crazy, insane athlete, but pretty good athlete, shifty. You'll be able to get open and hopefully be a good get open quick piece for Anthony Richardson and this offense heading forward. Depth-wise, you got Ashton Dolan, who this team really likes. He'll be kind of their 5th guy. And then 6th, 7th guys. Maybe they keep, Mike Strachan, Rashad Perriman. They got Vincent Smith. They got a couple, guys that bounce around the league for a little bit. Pittman, McKenzie, Downs, Pierce, and Dolan, obviously the top 5. Whatever mix of guys end up keeping after that probably won't have a whole lot of impact on this team. So obviously, I think it's a good group of receiving weapons. Like, they're a very solid group. They just don't have a true number 1 wide receiver, which is really going to hurt them. If you had a true number 1 and Michael Pittman's your 2 and Alec Pierce is more of your 3 or 4, but Isaiah McKenzie's your main slot guy, that offense is looking a lot more exciting. But how it stands now, I'm just not scared of the passing attack from this team, especially when you have Anthony Richardson, who tends to hold on to the ball for a long time. You know, something I was going to point out is if you look at the NFL quarterbacks that get the ball out quickest, two of the top three is Tom Brady and Joe Burrow. If you look at the quarterbacks that hold on to the ball the most, it's like Zach Wilson, Marcus Mariota, some of these not great quarterbacks. Justin Fields is another one. So I'm just super pessimistic about the outlook of this passing attack. Obviously, I'm a lot more optimistic about this rushing game, but even then, I have some hesitancies, and it really starts with this offensive line. Obviously, around 2018, 2019, especially when Quentin Nelson first came into the league, this offensive line was elite and was one of the best units in the league, but it's really taken a couple steps back, and part of that is starting with Quentin Nelson, who might be one of the most overrated players in the league. Like, don't get me wrong, still a pretty good guard, but he's not elite anymore, not an all-pro caliber guy like he was early in his career. And I think part of the reason that this offensive line has taken a step back is due to his dip in form. And, it's been a couple years since we've seen this elite version of Quentin Nelson. And so I'm just not sure if I'm projecting that version to suddenly come out heading into 2023. Maybe Shane Steichen can help him get back on track, but showed us a couple years now of not quite being that same Quentin Nelson that people thought he was going to be, or thought he was when he first entered, when everybody thought he was taking over the league. So I just don't know. If he's your best piece, obviously you're happy about that. He's a good guard, but he's not the number one overall guard like he was very early in his career. And so I think that explains part of the dip in this offensive line. Obviously, you got Ryan Kelly right next to him. Don't have a whole lot to say. He's kind of just a solid center. Not really great at anything, but kind of just gets the job done and performs decently. Then you got Braden Smith, right tackle's not slow. He's developed into a really good tackle. He's played very well for them in his career. Just getting better and better, and obviously you're excited that you have him. So with Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, and Braden Smith, you're not worried about those three. That is a solid group of three, and they have that'll give you at least a floor of an okay offensive line. However, this offensive line does have two question marks. Bernard Raymond, however, you're a little bit more expecting a little bit more from him heading into this year. Actually ended up grading out as a pretty decent player in the whole part of the season. He obviously started off his season quite poor, but towards the end of the year really kind of picked it up and started playing a lot better. Obviously still has some ways to go before we're, convinced that he's going to be the long-term guy and really be a solid addition to this offensive line. But you're not quite as worried. However, part of the reason that Matt Ryan struggled early into the year is because he just wasn't very good. That's kind of what cost him. And so, rookie quarterback who likes to hold on to the ball with potentially blindside blocker who's not the best, I feel like that's going to lead to hit a lot of him, scrambling and playing hero ball, which ultimately might end up hurting this offense a bit in the long run. However, where you're really worried is Will Fries at right guard. Obviously, you had a lot of Danny Pinter playing here last year, who was not very good. You had Will Fries kind of took over towards the end of the year and also wasn't very good. And he was a 7th round draft pick. So, maybe you hope that he can develop into a decent guard for you, but last year he was not very great. And obviously, as a 7th round pick, I'm not expecting him to suddenly take this huge leap forward. And so looking at this offensive line, I think you have 3 solid pieces, 2 weak spots, and no elite talent. So I think you're going to have poor offensive line play. And obviously, Jonathan Taylor took a step back last year. Part of the reason being due to injury, but part of the reason is this offensive line just wasn't good. And, Jonathan Taylor's breakout year, obviously the offensive line was playing much better. And a lot of running the ball comes down to, you know, how good your blocking is. And if you're not having great blocking, then you're not going to get the same version of Jonathan Taylor, which is going to hurt this, running game with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor that people theoretically could be so scared of. And obviously, as I was saying, Shane Steichen came from the best offensive line to the league to this. And so I just expect a natural dip, and, he's not going to be able to do some of the same things that he was doing in Philadelphia where they had so much talent at his fingertips. He's going to have, he's a lot less talent at every position. I think outside of, a left guard, I think, whoever's starting in Philadelphia is better at every single position outside of running back with Miles Sanders, you know what I mean? So overall, I'm just not super optimistic about this offense. I forgot to mention Jelani Woods, who, speaking of absolute freaks, like we're talking about Anthony Richardson, this guy is another absolute freak. Obviously 6'7", insane athlete, strong, explosive, agile. Like, he's just the potential of Anthony Richardson and Jelani Woods are these two just mad and created characters just running around, just being insane athletes is insane. So obviously you're excited about him. He's really started to break out towards the end of last year. And, hopefully he can keep developing and become a very solid option for this offense. I got Mo Alley Cox, who's just a guy. He'll block. He has solid hands, but he's not giving you much explosivity on offense. Kylan Granson will kind of be your third piece. They draft Will Mallory, which he's kind of whatever. So overall, I'm just not expecting much. I think you're going to have a bottom 5 offense. I think this offense has the potential to be really fun with a lot of the pieces they have here, but I think they're just missing a few pieces and some development away from having a decent offense. And so, I think give this team, a year or two, or maybe they are the 31st overall team, like I'm predicting, and they get a shot at Marvin Harrison to have a true number 1 wide receiver. Now we're talking, but heading into this year, I'm just not super excited about this team. But now I'll kind of transition to the defense, which is also where I have a lot of hesitancies about this team. Obviously, I said I'm not a huge fan of Gus Bradley, and we'll kind of talk about, as I was mentioning, just hasn't produced great offense or defenses. But if you look at this defense, there is just not great talent. We'll start about the part of it that I'm most concerned about is this secondary. This might be the worst secondary in the league, especially now that it's confirmed that Isaiah Rodgers is gone. Because, wow, it is rough. So obviously your best player on that back end is Julian Blackmon, which, last year he might have been 3rd, 4th, 5th best starter. Now he's your best guy, outside of maybe Kenny Moore. He's just a solid safety. You're not really, he's not changing the game for you. He's not some elite crazy playmaker. He kind of just, he's there. I got Rodney Thomas, who isn't great. Nick Cross had some potential as a safety coming out of Maryland, so maybe you hope that he steps up for one of these guys, but I'm just not expecting a whole lot from that back end at safety. And then the cornerback room is gross to look at. Obviously, you have Kenny Moore, who yet again 2 years ago was one of, if not the best slot cornerback in the league. However, Eberflus leaves to bring in Gus Bradley, and he really takes a step back. Part of me thinks that he also might just not be the same player without Eberflus. I think that is a true possibility. However, maybe last year was just a fluke and he goes back to being a really good corner, and that's really going to help this secondary, but I think we're just going to get, another not great season from Kenny Moore. But then this cornerback room, these outside corners, it is bad. So obviously, they threw a bunch of darts at cornerback here in the draft, and you're hoping between the three of these guys that you draft, at least one of them will step up and give you a good enough play. And Juju Brent's a freak athlete coming out of college too. Like, this team just loves their freak athletes, but it is a lot of potential, or a lot of pressure to put on rookie cornerbacks, especially paired with not great pass rush, as we'll get into later. But they're not going to have a whole lot of help on the front end of this defense, so you're going to be asking a lot from these guys. Maybe they'll be able to stay back and in the zone coverage and make plays, but rookie corners in the past couple of years, a couple of them have broken out and been really solid, but a lot of them have also really struggled. So between the three of these guys, you're hoping, at least one of them will play well for you, but I just don't know what you're expecting. Then you got Dallas Flowers, who I think is listed as the starter right now. Also just not a great guy. Not a great corner. So you got four guys. You're hoping at least two of them will step up and give you competent play, but I just don't expect that to happen either. Then obviously linebackers, you got three good guys here in Shaq Leonard, Zaire Franklin, and EJ Speed. Shaq Leonard, yet again, when Eberflus was here, played really well. Eberflus leaves, and he really struggled last year. Granted, yet again, could have been because of the injury issues, but he kind of took a step back, so maybe Eberflus was really getting the best out of him, and he might, start struggling again now that Eberflus is gone. Because, as you said, Matt Eberflus really got this defense overperforming, and I think Gus Bradley is going to have this defense underperforming. But obviously, if he comes back healthy and is looking like the player he's becoming, you'll have a really good linebacker, one of the better linebackers in the league. Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed both can kind of get on the field and play very decent for you. The D-line, though, is also where I have a lot of concerns for this team. I also just realized I can't spell, so let me just fix that real quick. Obviously, your main guy here is DeForest Buckner, a really good interior player. Not, in that tier 1 of guys such as Chris Jones or Aaron Donald. Just like Jonathan Allen, he is in that tier 2 of pretty decent interior guys. Then you got Grover Stewart next to him, who is one of the better nose tackles, just straight up in the league. Doesn't offer a whole much getting after the quarterback, but as a straight up nose tackle, he's one of the better guys. DJ Reader and Vita Vea are definitely probably the two top guys you think of when you think of nose tackles, but he's definitely in and around the conversation of one of the better guys in the league. So obviously you're happy that you have those two guys, and you bring in Taven Bryan to help you get some depth on the interior. But if Grover Stewart gets down, you don't have a whole lot of great depth to help replace him, and so that could end up, impacting the rush defense if he goes down. They draft Adebawore, who's this athletic freak, but he's 6 foot, 6'1", 280. Like, he's just not going to be able to hold up defending the run. Like, even Aaron Donald has not been a great run defender in his career, so you're just not expecting a whole lot from him on that end. But they just don't have a whole lot of, these bigger guys on the interior to really help stop the run, who are actually, really good run stoppers. So obviously you're happy that you have those two guys, but if you start having injuries, this defensive line, especially one of those two guys, is going to start looking real rough real quick. But then part of the issues, part of where I'm really worried about this team is on the edge. I feel like they're going to have absolutely no pass rush, which is really going to hurt these rookie cornerbacks and poorer secondary on the back end. I guess your number one guy is Kwity Paye, who is okay. I think last year he finished in and around, the 40 pressure territory range, which, that's number 2 or, numbers. You're not nowhere close to the Nick Bosa's and Micah Parsons, who had double the amount of pressures. I'm just not sure if I, expect him to take that step up and become a true number one edge rusher. At least not to a point where he's elite like that. Maybe steps up to be a real low end number one, but I just don't expect that happening. And obviously they're replacing Samson Abukum for Yannick Ngakoue. Obviously, I guess this team wants to get more into doing a lot more stunts and creative stuff with this getting after the quarterback. And Samson Abukum is good at that. However, you know when he's on the Niners and he has Nick Bosa on the other side, and offensive lines are clearly focused on Nick Bosa and kind of stopping him, you can it's a lot easier to draw up some of these stunts because you know exactly where the offense is, what the offense is going to be shifting their line to. But you know teams aren't scared to quiddy pay like they are Nick Bosa, nowhere close. And so I think that's going to result in a lot less productiveness from Samson Abukum. But obviously, a lot of coaches, he's been successful as kind of being a stuntman. He'll probably be decent and he'll have another decent year, but, I don't think you're getting anything close to having a number one edge rusher, a true number one elite edge rusher from any of the players on this roster. And you got Taekwon Lewis, Dio Odeyingbo, Gennard Avery, draft, Titus Leo late in the draft. A lot of these guys are going to rotate in, and they'll give you, early down rush defense, and maybe they'll try to get after the quarterback, but it's going to be real rough getting after the quarterback, especially if they start getting injuries. Especially if DeForest Buckner gets injured, then I don't know what you do. Grover Stewart gets injured too, and then you're going to have no interior presence. I mean, just one or two injuries, and this defense can go from bad to horrible. So honestly, I think the Colts probably going to have the worst defense in the NFL. I think the Gus Bradley domino could be one of the first dominoes to fall this NFL season, is Gus Bradley kind of being the early season scapegoat for why this team is struggling, but it's just not a great group. So obviously you pair my pessimism about this team's offense with, to me, what is shaping out to be a very poor defense. That is not a recipe for a good NFL team. So now let's kind of look at their schedule. So obviously, I've talked about, the roster and how I'm not super excited. And this schedule isn't great for them either. Their line is at 6.5. I kind of have them around 6.1 wins, so I think you should take the under. However, it's close, so I probably wouldn't bet this myself. They definitely could have had a worse draw for schedules. Out of all schedules, this is definitely a pretty favorable one. Obviously, open against Jacksonville. Then they go to Houston, to Baltimore. I think that's probably 3 straight losses. Then they take the Rams at home, which that could easily be one of their first wins on the season. Then they got Tennessee at home, which to me, these are the home teams that could win that, but that's still no guarantee. Then you have to go to Jacksonville, which is rough. Then you got a stretch of facing Cleveland and Saints at home, which I think are decent matchups for them. Got to go to Carolina, which yet again I think is a decent matchup. Got to go to New England, which I think, especially Gardner or Anthony Richardson, I think that's going to be a tough game for them. Obviously, going your bye week, come back, you got Tampa, Tennessee, got to go to Cincy, so might as well just throw that game away. Then you got Pittsburgh, going to Atlanta, Vegas, and then Houston at home to finish the season. So, I mean, they definitely have some games in there that, they could win. I think best case scenario, you're winning, maybe you win both games in Houston and you win a couple of these home games. So I think, best case scenario, this could be a team that is around 7 or 8 wins. However, I just don't see a world in which this team competes for the division or, seriously competes for the division or to make the playoffs. I just think they have too many games where I just don't really favor them to win. And so I'll kind of make my pick. So I think right now, I think they'll lose this, probably lose these games. So I think we're looking at 0-3. I think they could win against the Rams, but I think they lose against the Titans. I think they drop this one to the Jags. Week 7 or 8, I think they'll probably take one of these games. Probably think they lose to Cleveland and maybe beat the Saints. I think on the road against the Panthers is hard. I guess that New England game's Germany game, but even then in Germany, um, I think Bill Belichick is going to continue his streak against rookie quarterbacks. Coming back from the bye week, I think they can take care of Tampa. I think they probably drop this to Tennessee. I think they lose at Cincy. I think Steelers will take advantage of them. Probably lose to the Falcons. I think they could maybe win these last 2 games to get them to 5 wins. I don't think that's a horrible possibility. Like I said, I had them beating Houston. They'll probably split the Houston series, and I could see them winning this against Oakland. So I think best case scenario, or the scenario that I see most likely happen, is maybe get to 5 wins. Yeah, I'm just not super excited for the outlook of this team with a not great offense, bad defense, and, not a hard schedule, but not necessarily cupcake schedule either. And so we'll kind of just recap it for you real quick. Some of the takeaways for them is obviously that it is a brand new situation for Shane Steichen with much less talent. On the bright side, you're glad that he already has experience calling plays, since you're happy about that. However, going from talent-wise, the best offense probably, to one of the worst offensive talent groupings, it's a little bit worried. However, where you are a little bit optimistic about this team is they do have a fairly easy draw on the schedule. Some of their road games obviously are very hard, as you were talking about, like at Baltimore and at Cincy. You can kind of throw those games away, but home games against the Rams, Browns, Saints, Buccaneers, Steelers, and Raiders, those are winnable games against not super high-end teams. So those 6 games, you win half of them. That's 3, 4, 5. If you're able to win a handful of those games, that's really going to help your season outlook, especially if you're able to win some of these divisional games. So getting to that 6.5 and hitting that over, to me, is it's plausible. Definitely don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. I just don't see that happening. But obviously, schedule could have been a lot worse for you. However, a lot of this offense is going to hinge on what that we get from Anthony Richardson. Obviously he needs to learn how to get the ball out quicker and kind of play in the structure of the offense. But, he does have the potential, like Justin Fields has, to make some ridiculous plays. However, what are we going to get? Because as I'm saying, I think passing-wise, we're going to have some poor weapons. Pair that with an okay offensive line. I don't think you're going to have a horrible offensive line, but you're going to have some holes. You're going to have some weaknesses, and that is going to end up costing them some games. Obviously, as I said, I think it's going to be an underwhelming Gus Bradley defense. I think there's not a whole lot of talent. I don't think he does a great job of getting the most out of his talent, so I just don't expect much from this defense, especially with, as I said, how terrible this secondary is going to be. And one of the themes that's kind of been affecting this Colts team for several years now is they have good, not great talent, but in low-value positions. Quentin Nelson, DeForest Buckner, and Jonathan Taylor are the 3 best players, but they're playing guard, interior lineman, and running back. Imagine how much different we'd be looking at this team if they had an elite tackle, an elite edge rusher, and an elite wide receiver. That's just what happened. Also a linebacker. They have solid players at just not positions they necessarily want your solid players to be at. If they had an extra corner or 2 that was really good, you'd be a lot more excited about this team. And so something I forgot to break down in the first video that I wanted to kind of break down and talk about is kind of some of the goals and kind of some of the narratives of this team heading into the season. Obviously, every team's goal is really to win the Super Bowl. However, a lot of teams realize they won't. So everybody kind of has their own goals. I think the goal for this Colts team is to make sure you feel comfortable with Shane Steichen heading forward and to not break Anthony Richardson. Just please, he has too much upside as a quarterback. I'm begging you, Indianapolis, please do not ruin Anthony Richardson. Please do not Sam Darnold Anthony Richardson. We deserve to see him be an excellent quarterback. So your goal this year, please do not ruin him, okay? But a narrative that I'm kind of looking at heading into this year is Chris Ballard being on the hot seat. Obviously, Frank Reich was the first domino to fall, and Chris Ballard's helped make some decent teams here in the last couple of years, but obviously this team just hasn't been able to really make any sustained playoff or AFC pushes. As I'm talking about, with this schedule, you know, heading into your bye week, you have 2 wins. Is Chris Ballard going to be a domino to fall? If you finish another season with 5 wins, do we feel comfortable? Is Chris Ballard gonna get another chance? We saw how randomly he seemed to fire Frank Reich. Do we think Chris Ballard's gonna, get a lot more loyalty? I mean, maybe so, but I don't know. Just I could see this. Gus Bradley sucks, and Chris Ballard gets the axe, and just a lot of kind of chaos happening yet again in his coaching staff, which really hurt him last year. So we'll see. Obviously, I'm a lot lower on this Colts team than I think a lot of people are. So kind of let me know where you think I'm right about this team, where I'm wrong. Are the Colts going to be the second worst team in the NFL? Are they going to be even worse? Are they going to be even better? Just kind of let me know what you think, and appreciate you all very much for watching, guys. Peace.